And met with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Tuesday. It's his third visit to China in as many months, and if you include his visits to Singapore and South Korea at the border village of Panmunjom, it marks a remarkable turnaround in his style of diplomacy after not leaving North Korea for over 6 years since coming to power in 2011. Moreover, his third meeting with Xi further emphasizes the improving relations between Pyongyang and Beijing. What does this new era of international travel for Kim mean for the regime, and how will his visits to China affect the ongoing talks with the US? We discuss that and more with a guest in the studio later, but first we turn to our Devin Whiting, who's at the news center with the latest news updates. Devin?
Hi, Jong-un. South Korean officials are at the inter-Korean Kaesong Industrial Complex in the north for the second day in a row, trying to lay the groundwork for a joint liaison office for the two Koreas. And a South Korean civic group is making a trip to Pyongyang as well to discuss holding various kinds of joint events with the North. Oh Jung-hee has more.
17 South Korean government officials and staff from private sector firms are visiting the inter-Korean Kaesong Industrial Complex again on Wednesday. The visiting staff include those from Seoul's Unification Ministry and private sector firm Hyundai Asan, which played a key role in establishing the industrial complex. Visiting the site for the second day in a row, the South Korean team is expected to continue Tuesday's work. On Tuesday, they worked on draining the flooded basement of the Inter-Korean Interaction and Cooperation Office. And with North Korean officials' help, the team also cleaned up and checked the electricity network at another building, where they plan to set up a temporary liaison office. The two Koreas agreed at their high-level talks early this month to set up the joint liaison office within the Kaesong Industrial Complex, a factory park that was jointly run by the two Koreas. But the complex needs renovation because it's been shut down since February 2016. Meanwhile, 15 South Koreans are traveling to Pyongyang for a 4-day stay starting Wednesday. They're from a civic group that was formed in 2005 to implement the June 15th Joint Declaration, the first ever summit agreement between the two Koreas. They're to meet with authorities in Pyongyang to discuss inter-Korean joint events and ways to boost civil interactions. The leaders of South and North Korea agreed in late April to hold joint events on major occasions observed by both sides. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
In the next few days, the Trump administration reportedly expects North Korea to start returning the remains of up to 200 people believed to be U.S. service members who died during the Korean War. Reuters cites two White House officials who spoke on condition of anonymity as saying planning is underway. The exact date and location of the handover has not yet been confirmed, but the officials said the remains would be given to United Nations Command in South Korea and then taken to a Defense Department lab at Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii for identification. The U.S. Department of Defense estimates that close to 7,700 American service members are still classified as missing in action from the Korean War, of whom approximately 5,300 are thought to be located in North Korea. South Korea's ruling party, government ministries, and officials from the presidential office met today for the first time since the ruling party's landslide victory in last week's local elections. The three sides agreed to work to improve people's lives and take follow-up measures to the recent inter-Korean summits. Kim Min-ji reports.
The landslide victory for the ruling Democratic Party of Korea is a show of the public's request that the party and the government work to improve their livelihoods. That was the consensus among senior ruling party lawmakers and top officials from government ministries and the presidential office, who promised Wednesday that all efforts will now be directed at bettering people's lives.
The outcome of the local elections is a call for establishing lasting peace on the peninsula and taking care of the people's lives. We will thoroughly abide by those demands. We will work to show that the people made the right decision.
And to get started, officials have decided to give a little bit of flexibility to the introduction of shorter working hours from next month. Firms with 300 or more employees would have had to reduce their employees' maximum weekly working hours from the current 68 hours to 52 hours from July 1st, but they will now have a 6-month grace period to implement the policy. The change was made as part of the government's drive to improve work-life balance.
The amendment to the law came very quickly, and there hasn't been much time to prepare for the change. Although it's hard to adjust the starting time of the implementation, there is need to set a grace period for a soft landing.
On top of that, the government plans to announce a comprehensive set of customized support and job creation measures, depending on people's income level. President Moon has been pushing for a so-called income-led growth model, which consists of creating a virtuous cycle of increased household income and spending. As for the controversy surrounding a recent amendment to the Minimum Wage Act, the meeting's participants noted the importance of informing the public of any planned policies and their effects, so that they can win their support and understanding. Some have argued that the amendment, which calls for an inclusion of bonuses and other benefits of a certain size as part of the minimum wage, undermines the wage hike.
The Presidential Policy Office will work around three goals: being swift in implementing policies, making sure policies have the desired impact, and making sure people feel the effects of policies. We will put in all efforts so that the policies we implement bring about changes to people's livelihoods.
The officials also made clear on the need to swiftly implement follow-up measures in light of the recent developments on the Korean Peninsula, such as carrying out economic cooperation, family reunions, and joint participation in sporting events. The ruling party also said they will call on opposition parties for their cooperation to ratify the summit declaration or at least adopt a resolution that supports it. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, President Moon Jae-in is flying to Moscow on Thursday for what will be the first state visit to Russia by a South Korean leader in 19 years. Ahead of that trip, President Moon gave interviews earlier today to a number of Russian media outlets. Those outlets included the news agency TASS, the state-owned TV channel Russia 1, and the newspaper Rossiyskaya Gazeta. According to a Blue House press release, Moon introduced his vision for boosting Seoul-Moscow relations, which is based on mutual prosperity. It was also aimed at promoting the Russian people's interest in, understanding of, and friendly view of South Korea and its leader. TASS will release the key points starting this afternoon, and Rossiyskaya Gazeta's website will post the online version of the interview on Thursday. The Trump administration is not backing off its tough trade stance against China, and Beijing is going ahead with tariffs of its own. Investors on both sides have been concerned and stocks have tumbled, but officials in Washington are insisting that it's not a situation that'll get out of control. Kim Yo-san has this report.
The United States and China are sinking into a deepening trade conflict as President Trump threatened this week to impose an additional 10% tariff on $200 billion of Chinese goods. He called the move retaliation for Beijing's decision last weekend to raise tariffs on $50 billion worth of U.S. products. China said it would impose such tariffs following Washington's 25% tariff on Chinese goods worth $50 billion. China's foreign ministry also warned the U.S. was initiating a trade war.
Again and again, the U.S. has been provoking a trade war. This method leads to the loss of people's trust and harms the interests of people and enterprises from both China and the U.S. and harms the interests of the people of the entire world.
President Trump's announcement to impose additional tariffs on China caused global markets to tumble, with the Dow currently on a 6-day-long losing streak. The announcement also drew heavy criticism from retailers, tech companies, and manufacturers, yet Washington remains unmoved. White House trade advisor Peter Navarro told reporters on Tuesday that it's China who has more to lose in any trade war, highlighting that China's exports to the U.S. exceeded the amount of goods exported from the U.S. to China. He also added the actions are, quote, necessary to defend the U.S. Addressing concerns that such a conflict could lead to worsening bilateral ties between Washington and Beijing, Navarro explained it's just a trade conflict, adding that President Trump has a close personal relationship with his Chinese counterpart. Kim Yo-san, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, South Korean stocks closed higher on Wednesday as foreign investors jumped back in after a 5-day losing streak. Shares had fallen in the past several sessions on fears that trade tensions between the U.S. and China could hurt local businesses and exports. The benchmark Kospi added 1% to close at just under 2364, with foreigners buying nearly $100 million worth of shares. In recent days, the Korean won had fallen sharply against the dollar, but it gained back a little strength, closing at 11.05 against the greenback, up 4 won from Tuesday. I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un visited China for the third time in less than 3 months, and the latest visit comes just a week after his historic summit with the US president. While Pyongyang and Beijing talk of closer ties, the US is closely watching the developments. Lee Ji-won has more.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's third visit to China is seen to have further tightened Pyongyang-Beijing ties, but the trip could worry the US. North Korea's state-run Korea Central News Agency on Wednesday reported on Kim Jong-un and Chinese President Xi Jinping's Tuesday meeting, highlighting the family-like, harmonious atmosphere at the welcome banquet. The report contained Kim's comments on the North's great friendship with China, saying that Pyongyang and Beijing have developed their ties beyond their traditional relationship and that the North will work closely with China in opening a new future for the Korean peninsula and the region. KCNA also mentioned that President Xi praised Kim for his efforts toward peace and stability in the peninsula, and that the two sides are entering a new period in their ties following Kim's first visit in March. Xi also said that Kim's latest visit shows the world the unwavering relationship between the two. Chinese state-run broadcaster CGTN also reported on Kim Jong-un's third visit to China and his talks with Xi Jinping on Tuesday, where Xi said China will remain committed to solidifying its ties with the North, regardless of any changes on the international and regional fronts. But these developments may have alarmed the U.S. amid reported talks over follow-up measures to the June 12 joint statement. At a press briefing on Tuesday, U.S. State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert said the U.S. is watching Kim's visit carefully and closely. And as if to remind China of the current situation, Nauert also touched on the maximum pressure policy.
I'd like to underscore the good work that President Xi and the Chinese government have done in helping to bring North Korea to the negotiating table, and we look forward to their continued support of the United States policy, and in fact, the world's policy on the maximum pressure campaign that we had instituted more than a year ago today.
Meanwhile, Nauert confirmed the U.S. has been in contact with the North since the summit in Singapore and that it's looking forward to Pyongyang following through on its commitments and agreements. However, she didn't announce any travel plans for Secretary of State Mike Pompeo or any lower-level officials to Pyongyang. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now joining us today to discuss Kim Jong-un's trip to China is Dr. Kim Chang-soo from the Korea Institute for Defense Analyses. Dr. Kim, it's good to have you with us again today.
Thank you for having me again. Thank you.
So Kim Jong-un was once seen as a reclusive leader who looked like he would never travel outside of North Korea. But now in 3 months, he's visited China 3 times, he's gone to Singapore, and he's even come to South Korea via the border village of Panmunjom. Have we entered a new era of international travel for North Korean diplomacy? What does this mean?
I think North Korea has entered a new age of diplomacy because Mr. Kim has a tremendous confidence in his own management, his own government, while he is absent in Pyongyang. But also he has been treated very well from the world leaders, including Trump and Mr. Xi. I think North Korea has finally entered a new stage of diplomacy from the reclusive stage. But I think the most important thing is Mr. Kim this is a version of Mr. Kim's maximum pressure and engagement. As Dr. Chung Park of CSI has actually pointed out, because we are talking about Mr. Trump's maximum pressure and engagement. But I think Mr. Kim has learned a lot from Trump's maximum pressure and engagement. So if you remember what he did last year, a lot of test firing of missiles, and over the last 5 years, as a matter of fact, he did almost 70 times of missile tests. And now he's all kinds of flurry of summit meetings with all these leaders in this part of the world. But she seems to be enjoying all this visit to the capital because he has been treating so well by the leaders. So this is Kim Jong-un's version of maximum pressure and engagement, I think the focus is moved to the second part, maximum engagement on his part, which has been pretty greeted pretty much warmly by not just by China or United States, but mostly from South Korea. I don't agree with the idea, though, that Mr. Kim has become a global trotter. I don't think so. He has just traveled to very close cities like Pyongyang. I mean the Tianjin. Beijing and Dalian. And Singapore, of course, but this is too short, relatively short. I'm sure he's going to ready to travel farther, including United States and Moscow someday. So he will become a global trotter someday, but not as at this moment right now.
One of the interesting things, another part of the interesting things about his trip to China was Chinese state media announced Kim's arrival in Beijing before it happened, which is quite different from his previous two visits, where news of his visit to China was only reported after he'd gone back to Pyongyang. What do you think was the thinking behind announcing this like this from both China and North Korea's perspective?
I think the both community countries have learned a lot from disclosing this kind of very important event from the world media, because they found they can take a lot of advantage by disclosing it already before it happened. I think because after all the world media knows where they are. All the flights are moving from, for example, like Pyongyang to Beijing, because we can get an on-time records of where they are heading for and where they're going to end. So there's no way denying all this kind of very important documentation, because technically it's available to us. If you visit the internet, and you can have, as a matter of fact, have the exact location where they are right now, Mr. Kim's flight, for example. So technically speaking, it's much more easily available kind of information available to us right now. But also the two capitals have learned a lesson that by revealing far in advance, they can really kind of quiet all these unnecessary, from their part, unnecessary miscalculation and all kind of bad misreading. So I think they have learned a lesson how they're going to improve and maximally PR. Because after all, they're going to make a kind of visit to Beijing this time again. So this, instead of just delaying his report until his arrival in Beijing, so I think they made it already, same as he did in Pyongyang. But after all, when we had a meeting in Singapore, many speculations were Mr. Kim might drop on Beijing on his way back to Pyongyang, so that he could debrief what has been discussed at the summit meeting with Trump. But that was not made. I think Mr. Kim made a very interesting decision yet, because just staying in a couple of hours a day on his way back to Pyongyang, he made another very important kind of impromptu kind of visit to Beijing, which is more stately, and he is much more welcome from Xi Jinping. So I think that's why he made another important visit to Beijing and Dalian in China as a whole in 3 months.
So North Korea was always, Kim was always, as you said, probably planning to brief Xi Jinping on the summit, on the results of the summit in some way or another. But then there is speculation as well, not just that they're briefing on the results of the summit, but also they're going to discuss how the roadmap towards the regime security, to secure the regime security alongside the denuclearization deal. What do you think Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un discussed? We can only speculate, but what the things they would want to have covered?
Because many speculations are already out there, because many people, after the summit meeting in Singapore, the two leaders of China and North Korea definitely want to talk about the most important issues on their agenda. That is the roadmap for denuclearization on the Korean, particularly in North Korea, but also how they're going to make a new relation between the United States and DPRK, how they're going to build a new peace region on the Korean Peninsula, because China believes they are really deeply involved in these two issues, denuclearization and also the peace regime on the peninsula. That's why definitely these two issues actually top their agenda, no question about that. But also some other issues at the leaders level, they were talking about how they're going to provide some economic incentives to North Korea in return for the denuclearization and also the building a new security regime on the peninsula. So they will maybe talking about what kind of economic sanctions, economic assumptions they might provide to North Korea. But also sanctions, of course, even though North Korea is fully implying this UN Security Council imposed sanctions on North Korea, but they are all bilateral sanctions on North Korea. So they might easing that kind of sanctions on North Korea because the time is coming pretty shortly that North Korea might have another kind of floodings in North Korea. So probably in this kind of humanitarian assistance from the outside was definitely needed from South Korea, United States. But China has been always the major provider of all these aid to North Korea when there's a big flooding. So again, speculation goes on like that. They might talking about what kind of aid they can get for if there is another flood relief in North Korea. Yeah.
Those lifting of sanctions they might have talked about, as you said, but what does that actually mean? Because right now the UN sanctions are still in place, but if China wants to lift sanctions of their own and help North Korea, won't that butt heads with what the US and what Trump wants to do, where they want to keep maximum pressure and sanctions on North Korea until North Korea shows complete denuclearization, or at least the process of denuclearization?
That's right. So China was willing to comply with the UN Security Council imposed sanctions. But as I talked to you, they have own individual country specific sanctions on North Korea. So they might work on easing those specific sanctions rather than UN Security Council position, because otherwise it might cause tremendous problem with the United States, but also some other UN member countries as well. So China might begin with a very easy and very humanitarian kind of assistance to North Korea without officially, eroding the Security Council, resolutions or the sanction system. So they're going to actually provide some actual help to North Korea so that North Korea really gets some assurance about its own regime. This is another way of very important role China might play on North Korea.
Kim's trip to Beijing coincided with the announcement that the South Korea and the United States were going to halt joint military drills, the Ulchi Freedom Guardian drills, as they're called. China has been calling for this for a long time. I'm sure they would have welcomed it very much. But what do you think of the argument that the suspension of the drills was actually not a concession by the US, but actually a way to pressure North Korea to take steps towards denuclearization? What do you think of that kind of argument?
My thinking is, this kind of suspension is a very important military exercise. We call it combined military exercise and training. Actually, three in a year. It's not a concession. It may look like concession, but it's a kind of prime water that North Korea should do something in advance, because they decided to talk about the denuclearization and the peace regime on the peninsula. So North Korea, because they gave one incentive, which is getting rid of nuclear facilities and rocket and test sites. So the United States was asked to do something in return. So I think this is a kind of quid pro quo by North Korea and the United States. So this should not be this kind of suspension of military exercise should not be seen as a concession, because we have, even though we reported very lately and there was a lot of criticism that the United States, South Korea have not talked seriously on these issues in advance. But I think we understand and missed this kind of military exercise, because it's not just for North Korea, but China definitely. Because the Chinese always show anger and worry whenever we have a very massive military exercise between the two countries, United States and South Korea. This was the typical response from Beijing. So a couple of years ago, when you had the annual military exercise like Key Resolve and Fall Eagle, they already angrily responded, blaming all these as war games, even though they was far away from the Korean waters, as a matter of fact. So, but when the U.S. naval, aircraft carriers were about to enter the Korean waters, they made a very strong, kind of protest and rebuttal. Why you are here? So this is not just for the United States, but for the North Korea. I'm sorry, but China as well, because they believe these military exercises between the two allies are actually hostile to them. This provocative term. But of course, from our perspective, it is a purely, defensive in nature, because we will never, because of democracy, we cannot enter or attack North Korea or China. It's impossible. But when there was there were an intrusion, maybe there was a military provocation from North Korea, And when we are required to respond strongly, then this massive military scale is a really important kind of deterrence. So we are not talking about the war. The most important thing, what matters, is deterrence. So we have to have this kind of maintain a very high level of deterrence in the olden times, in ordinary times, so that we can be really ready if there is a contingency occurrence on the peninsula. So this is more about the military exercise, deterrence purposes, and if deterrence fails, we're going to have to win. Very clear. But Chinese have been very strongly, opposed to this idea. So this is not just North Korean reaction to this, key resolve issues, the suspension. This is, I think Chinese will be very happy, welcoming mostly, as a matter of fact, more than North Koreans, by this suspension of our very important military drills.
Well, very interesting, Professor. Thank you for coming in today. We're out of time, unfortunately, but it's always great to get your insights and opinions.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Now, that's it from us for now, but hope you do join us again for more of the latest updates and analysis of the day's top stories next time. Thank you for watching and see you again. Goodbye.
Gyeongju, Gyeongsangbuk-do, is located in the southeast of Korea. It is a city of history and culture. From the founding until the overthrow of the Shilla dynasty, for 992 years, it was the capital of Shilla. Gyeongju itself is a living museum of the Shilla dynasty. There are many cities around the ruins and relics of the Shilla dynasty. Foreign visitors traveling to Gyeongju may think they are on a time machine heading back 1,500 years into the past. The old city has many tombs of kings of the Shilla dynasty. Many of the tombs are small hills and others are of mountain shape. Donggum and Wolji palaces were built during the Shilla dynasty in 674 AD. The royal family enjoyed the lake at the palaces. They are over 1,300 years old and have unearthed many precious relics of the unified Shilla period. Bulguksa Temple was registered as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is 1,500 years old and located in Toamsan Mountain, east of Gyeongju. The temple is a very delicate and beautiful work of art. Dabotap and Sokkatap Pagoda were made during the unified Shilla period and are registered as national treasures of Korea.